Welcome back to Learn Astrology with Mary. My name is Mary English. You'll find me at www.maryenglish.com, maryenglish.co.uk and UK Astrologer. Hello, we haven't spoken for a whole week. I've missed you. I do. I can't tell you how much I like doing my podcast. Maybe it's because I like listening to the sound of my own voice. But actually, I can't actually hear my voice as well as you can because I've got, jobby bobby headphoney things on. And yeah, so anyway, today is, I'm going to use the word serious. It's a serious subject. So I'm going to be discussing OCD. That's Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder. We're going to cover a little bit about the history of it. We're going to cover a little bit about what it is, but we're mostly going to cover what it isn't. Now, as you know, I'm also an alternative therapist. I've been working in private practice since the year 2001 when I qualified, and I started practicing with clients in supervision a year or two before that. So I've been working with members of the public with various different health conditions since at least 1999. So now that we're there 2024, so that's more than 25 years of working with people with various different things that they might have inverted commas wrong with them. So you can ask the question, Mary, what's this got to do with astrology? It's got a lot to do with astrology, because I'm not going to be telling you that there is an astrological signature for OCD, because there isn't. What astrology will allow us to do is to find out what happened and how it affected you or the person that we're talking about. Because the biggest question that you have to ask someone who's suffering from any form of mental illness is the question, what happened to you? Now, we don't ask the question, I'm saying I don't ask the question, how is it for you? What does it make you feel? What's going on for you? We can ask all of those questions later on. The most important question to ask someone with a mental health illness is, what happened to you? Now, I also need to point out to you there's a difference between mental illness and mental disability. Now, as I've mentioned before, I had a youngest sister called Katie. She's the youngest in the family. I've done a podcast on her. She was born with Down syndrome, and they used to call it a mental handicap. They now call it a learning disability, which differentiates it from a learning difficulty. A learning difficulty is that you have a difficulty learning. A learning disability is something that you're born with or never change. Can improve, can get a bit better, but it's to categorize people that are born with a mental disability. Okay, so learning disability, they don't call it mental disability anyway. So giving you a teeny bit of history about mental disabilities. Back in the day, people were put into hospital that had Down syndrome. So you would go into a hospital with people that were mentally ill, and also what they used to call back in the day mentally handicapped. Those are two totally different things. A mental illness is something that happens. No one is born with a mental illness. They can be born with a mental disability, but we have to ask the question, when you're ill mentally, what happened to you? And that's where the focus of healing with the person needs to be. Now, as I said before, there's the different modalities within astrology: earth, air, fire. No, sorry. That's the elements: earth, air, fire, and water. The modalities are mutable, fixed, and Cardinal. And I've said before that people that are a mutable sign or have mutable planets in their minds will live a lot in the past. And so when working with someone that has a lot of mutable planets, the question, what happened to you, is even more uppermost and needs to be healed. Okay. Now, if you're a cardinal sign, you've predominantly got cardinal planets in your chart, your concern will be, and the discussion needs to be about, where do you want to go with your unwellness? In how far into the future have you planned for your mental illness to recover from? And if you're a fixed sign, you're going to want to feel better now, not yesterday, not tomorrow. A lot of the conversation when working with clients that are fixed signs or have a lot of fixed in their chart is, what can we do now to assist you with the mental illness that you have? And I need to point out that OCD is a mental illness. It's not a badge that you wear to differentiate yourself from other people or to join a club of other people that have OCD. Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder is an obsession and a compulsion and is a disordered state of the mind. And I hasten to point out, it's got nothing to do with the chemicals in your head. So if anybody tells you you've got a chemical imbalance, punch them in the nose, because that isn't the case. And I don't want to push the point home too far, but I know a lot about mental illness. Okay, I've specialized quite a lot in my life with clients. I haven't advertised, oh, I can help you with mental illness. It's just that people that tend to come to me will mostly have more of an emotional or mental problem of some sort than a physical. So even in my homeopathy practice, I haven't worked with a lot of people that have got something just physically wrong with them. And anyway, even people that do have something just physically wrong with them will also have an emotional mental attitude towards it. Okay, so just to let you know, we're going to be covering OCD. We're not going to cover specifically the astrology of it, but what we are going to look at is how can knowing someone's chart help them and those around them, assist them in their place of OCD. Okay, I hope I've made that clear. Now, OCD is a, inverted commas, modern definition, description, whatever you want to call it, of a mental illness. Now, I started training in the 1990s. The reference books that I had to buy back then to learn about pathology and disease and how the body works didn't have and don't have references in there for OCD. We learned a lot about mental problems and diagnoses, but OCD, inverted commas, hadn't been invented. ADD and ADHD equally were not in the public mind. They were, inverted commas, described and developed later on. Now, the chart that we are going to look at is someone who's specialised in writing about and researching OCD. Okay, we're also going to, as we go further into this podcast, we're going to be talking more about what OCD is and what it isn't. Now, there is an actual date when OCD was defined as a disease. And I don't want to get you too deeply into mental health literature and classification, all the rest of it, because it's can be quite distressing for people. But there's an organisation called the World Health Organization. You've heard of them, WHO, WHO. Now, the World Health Organization define diseases, and they have a thing called the ICD, which is the International Classification of diseases. I don't know how often it comes out, not too sure, maybe it comes out every year or so, but it was in their ICD-11 that OCD was first defined. So I can just read you some blurb here. The World Health Organization is in the process of publishing the 11th edition of the International Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems, ICD-11. So this article discusses the rationale behind the creation of the new, inverted commas, obsessive-compulsive and related disorders, O.C.D. section in the ICD-11 chapter on mental and behavioural disorders, and compares it with ICD-10 and the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-5. The new section on OCD was introduced into the ICD-11 after a review of the relevant literature had been accumulated since the publication of ICD-10 in 1990. The proposed OCD section includes obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, body dysmorphic disorder, olfactory reference disorder, hypochondriasis, hoarding disorder, trichotillomania, and skin-picking disorder. Tourette's syndrome is also cross-referenced. I won't read you anymore because you're going to turn off. Safe to say that prior to 1990, no one was even looking to give someone a diagnosis of that because it hadn't been defined. It's a bit like, I'm not saying that people weren't suffering from it, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying it hadn't been given a definition. So if we say things like the word like didn't become an enormous part of Western language until Facebook invented the like button, and that then prompted people to use the word like rather a lot, which they didn't use in the Middle Ages. They didn't use it when I was growing up. That type of thing. Also the other word so. So the World Health Organization got together with psychiatrists, obviously didn't get together with members of the public that were suffering from things, and defined what this, inverted commas, new mental health condition was. And because they'd now defined it, they could then go to what is it that makes a person have it, what symptoms would they express, so that we can then recognise them in our psychiatric practices and go, you have OCD, and then develop a health plan for you or whoever. Now, this is completely different to how homeopathy works. In homeopathy, we don't care what your diagnosis is. We're not even interested in the diagnosis. We're interested in you. We're also interested in how do your symptoms ruin your life, which bit of it is the one that makes it hard. And then we'll focus down on those symptoms. Homeopathy is so specific. Won't get you there. Okay, so this is an awful lot of backstory to this discussion, but it's really, really important when explaining something, not to dive straight into where we are now with OCD. We have to remember the history of it. People weren't even having that as a diagnosis. So if you were to occasionally say, oh, I've got OCD, because you've decided to line a few books up on a shelf and make them into some sort of order, that isn't what OCD is. It's two things in there, obsessive and compulsive. So the obsessive is to be obsessed on something, and also compulsion. So I'm going to give you a bit more of a definition of what it is. And I'm quite, what's the word I want to use? I'm aiming today to give you a better understanding of what mental illness is and mental illness isn't. I've grown up in a family with somebody with a mental disability, so therefore when they were going to school and stuff, we were, because that's different back in the day, there were other people that had a mental illness but not a mental disability. So in fact, actually, I've grown up quite surrounded by people with various different versions, and also because of my private practice. Now, I also need to point out that if you or someone you know is mentally ill, just the same as if they broke their leg, they are now ill. They are not doing whatever they're doing because they want to piss you off, excuse my French, okay? A mental illness and a severe mental illness, I'm talking about something like schizophrenia, a severe mental illness, the person themselves cannot fix it themselves. Now, equally, if you break your leg, you cannot fix that yourself too easily. Maybe if you crashed your aeroplane in the middle of the Andes somewhere and there were no medics around, you might strap something to your leg and help it a bit. But a severe mental illness cannot be sorted out yourself. It's not something I would ever recommend somebody to do on their own or at home, because a person that is suffering from a severe mental illness, part of them being mentally unwell is not knowing that they are unwell. For instance, people with bipolar will have a high moment and they'll absolutely love it, and they don't think that's anything wrong until they get to the down bit of it, and it's like, oh, I absolutely hate this. And again, there's this discussion as well about things that are spectrum disorders, that you are either you're one end of the spectrum or you're the other end of the spectrum. I don't go a whole host with that one. And this whole idea of labelling people, and for people, I'm not talking about people, everybody, it can be in discussions that people will give themselves a diagnosis without even going to a doctor. Will Google it. Dr. Google is the worst thing. Don't get me started. I have OCD. Oh, do you? Have you been to see a psychiatrist? Have you been to see your doctor? Have you had to fill out a load of lists of things? Have you sat in a room with someone for 90 minutes and talked about your whole life? And then for them, well, actually, if you're in the UK, it won't be 90 minutes, more like 10 minutes. But you've been to see the psychiatrist or it'd be psychiatrist in the UK, and that we have to wait months for that to happen. And that they've now given you this diagnosis, which will be in your notes. It will stay in your notes forever. It'll turn up if you get taken to hospital in an ambulance. It'll be there in your notes. Don't ever give yourself a mental illness diagnosis. Do not self-diagnose. Get someone else to check whether or not you do or don't have it. Okay, so please don't talk about it. I've got OCD. Unless you've been through the whole medical system and have the diagnosis. Okay, you with me there? Good. Now, with any mental health problem, there's always people that make money out of it. Biggest person I can think of is Sigmund Freud. Spent his whole life dealing with people that had some sort of mental or emotional problem, and I personally think he's a little bit sort of bent. I don't totally respect everything he ever said, because he was a little bit of a perv himself. He was a Taurus, if I remember rightly, and he had some Scorpio bits going on, and he was a little bit on the weird side. He did develop some great ideas and all the rest of it. So let me give you a definition. Of Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder is a relatively common psychological problem. The symptoms, which can be seriously disabling in extreme cases, can include excessive hand washing or other cleaning rituals, repeated checking, extreme slowness, and unwanted, repugnant, intrusive thoughts. Thing with people that have OCD as a mental illness could, for instance, not be able to leave their bedroom until they have tapped an amount of times on their work surface in the right order, and so they'll set up and they're crazy rituals, because in their mind that if they don't do these things, then something tragic will happen. So I was on the OCD UK website and I was listening to, which I won't put on here because this isn't a health podcast, this is an astrology podcast, and the lady was talking about her daughter who had it, and she was a nurse, so that's her day job, okay, and she used to drive to work. And part of her ritual of driving to work, and she worked a 20-minute drive away from where she lived, and she lived with mummy and daddy. And this is a nurse going to work. If she went over a bump in the road, she would imagine that she'd killed a person. So when she got home back again, she'd go out in her car again to check and look for the body of the person that she was convinced that she had killed. Now, obsessive-compulsive disorder is not sweepy thing lining up the books. It's debilitating. It prevents people from, I don't know how this, eventually she had to stop the job of being a nurse because she got so bad. And it was due to this thing, she'd gone over the bumps and she'd gone back out again, and her parents eventually got some help for her. OCD as a mental illness is debilitating. The person's whole life will revolve around the rituals and the obsessions that they've put into place to be able to make themselves feel safer than they are. It is debilitating, okay? And if you know someone that has those things and they're not getting medical help of any description, Auntie Mary would suggest that you shop them in, that you get them some help, because they won't be able to get the help themselves. When someone's obsessions have got that bad, they're not going to wake up one day and go, oh, I need some help. That is the difference between a physical illness, which most people can see when you've got something physically wrong with your hair, or your skin will be a strange colour, or you'll be coughing, or you have spots or whatever. But a mental illness, people cannot help themselves. They need help. Now, I'm not also going to get into the discussion about that most mentally unwell people, a number of people that are mentally unwell, part of their crisis will involve, it'll either be, there's different levels of it, but sometimes people can touch into the divine and they'll be seeing Jesus and stuff like that. And I think it's very sad that when somebody gets to that space, they're treated like a total lunatic and looked up rather than discussing more about what their beliefs are. So we need to keep that into mind. So that's enough about OCD. As a thing, I've explained the history of it. There will be compulsions, okay? And so it isn't just that they're lining the books up. So if somebody with bad OCD, they wouldn't just be lining the books up. There would also be a ritual associated with it. So, and they have to do things in the right order. They have to do these things this certain way. I will put the links, because I've got references for today's podcast, so you can go to OCD UK and you can read more about it, so that'll help. Now, the man that wrote the most about it and is quoted the most and wrote numbers of books on it is a guy called Stanley Rachman. There's not a lot of information on the internet, and there will very rarely be. People that work in, what's the word now? Like universities and work on research don't always end up in the public eye. They're very much below the radar. He's now passed over, he wrote numbers of books on it, and he wrote the biggest sort of reference book to it that somebody that works in the mental health area would be referring to. So those ICD documents I was mentioning earlier about who those things that are brought out every year, this is the definition of this is the definition of that. If they don't have the definition, and the unfortunate thing with the way medicine works, if you don't have a diagnosis, you can't have treatment. In homeopathy, we don't do diagnosis, so it just doesn't matter. It's what are your symptoms. Okay, but in the UK especially, I can't speak for America because I don't live there, but if you don't have a diagnosis, you can't get treatment. With homeopathy, there never were a diagnosis, it's just treating the symptoms. Now this man, Stanley Rachman, as I say, wrote the biggest book, sort of like the Bible version of it, of OCD. Any sort of medical something or other, there'll be people somewhere along the line that are going to make money. The ones that make the most money are the drugs companies, obviously, because they like to flog stuff. Now, OCD I'll put to one side for a minute, but ADHD and ADD were invented by drugs companies so they could flog Ritalin. Again, that didn't come out until the 1990s, and it exploded, ADD and ADHD, because the drugs companies wanted to get rid of their Ritalin, and it was used as, you know, your kiddie's got this, here's the drug, don't get me started. That's all about indicators. So here's his chart. Now we've talked about cardinal signs, like to live in the future, fixed signs, like to live in the present, and mutable signs, like to live in the past. And what I thought was incredible when I found his birth data, I haven't got a time of birth and I haven't got a city of birth, I've got a date of birth and a country. So I've used the capital, or a big city in South Africa, I've used Pretoria, that he has a grand cross in cardinal signs, and he has his moon in a mutable sign. So the moon in Pisces is a mutable moon which will live in the past, which will remember the things that hurt and upset me. And that's in opposition to his Neptune. But the chart itself is a grand cross. Did I say trine? I hope I didn't say trine. A grand cross in cardinal signs. He's got Jupiter in Libra, he's got Sun in Capricorn and Mercury, he's got Pluto in Cancer, and he's got Uranus in Aries. And look, they're all pretty late degrees. Ignore the MC, I've used whole sign, I don't know what time of day he's born, I've used 6 a.m. So the Sun is 28 degrees Capricorn, Pluto is 23 degrees Cancer retrograde. So he's got a Sun-Pluto opposition. So this is someone who's perfectly happy to go deeply into something and spend his whole life doing the same thing, going deeper. Uranus opposition Jupiter. So luckily the Jupiter isn't retrograde. Venus is retrograde, we won't talk about that. We've got Jupiter opposition Uranus. I think, no, Uranus isn't retrograde. So Jupiter is what I believe in. Uranus is the sudden happenings. So bing, bang, bong. Beliefs are going to change, possibly. Jupiter in Libra, what do I believe about relationships? Uranus in Aries, sudden happenings about leadership, because Aries is all about leadership. Sun in Capricorn, how can I get to the top of the mountain I'm climbing? Pluto in Cancer, deep change and transformation within my generation to do with my family. I can't remember if he had a family. I think he had a couple of kids. Let me just check. Now, Stanley Rachman himself was a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. There's a slight difference. The training isn't as long. And he did see patients face to face. He was also an emeritus professor at the Institute of Psychiatry in London and the University of British Columbia, Canada, and author of The Fear of Contamination. And that was after he'd written his book about OCD, I believe. He wrote an article about the obsessive mind and about people when they wash their hands and stuff. And he used a form of therapy which he thought was terribly helpful, which I don't agree, was that if somebody had compulsion to wash their hands all the time, he would tell them not to wash or clean their hands. And then that was, or to get their hands really dirty, and that's called immersive therapy. And I think personally that's cruel. And he puts here, we now plan to conduct a full-scale randomised controlled trial. If the effects of the therapy are confirmed, it would have a major impact. So this is somebody that that is working with people's minds and wants to get a whole load of people's minds together and prove his point. And this is when someone gets so high within their profession, because he's Capricorn, he wants to go high, in what he's doing. And he gets there, that he now wants to prove his point. And I think I wouldn't be encouraging that in anyone. And also the other thing you have to remember is that when people are working in a particular field and they've spent their whole lives in that particular field, like I'm in the field of astrology, for instance, what is it about that particular field that they're in that keeps them in that field? Is it the fame they get from it? Is it the money that they make? Is it the kudos it gives them? Are they staying in that place because it makes them feel la la la? Who knows? But I'm particularly allergic to experts in psychiatry. Not so much psychology, because I do like Peter Kinderman, who's a psychologist. I think he's at Liverpool University, don't quote me. But again, he doesn't work too much with people face to face. When you get to be that experienced as a psychiatrist, you see less and less people face to face. You're mostly supervising people that are seeing people face to face. Don't get me started anyway. Now the question was, did he have children, and what was his personal life like? Yeah, he had a wife and he had kids. One of his kids was born in 1963. He wasn't actually born in Pretoria, he was born in Johannesburg. Just to make life difficult, I was Googling Stanley Rachman. There's also the fact that his initial was J, which is Jack, so there's articles about Stanley Jack Rachman. But this chart still stands because it won't be any different, just with a little bit of distance. The planets that are in there will still apply. But we have to remember that he made his career, as modest as he might have been, and there's plenty of articles about him from other people in psychological organisations. As modest as he might have been, he defined what OCD was and was, in inverted commas, a specialist in it. And had he not done that, we wouldn't be talking about this today. We'd just be talking about mental illness. So that's his chart, okay? Okay, so let's go on to the astrology side of the podcast. What can you do to help someone who has that as a diagnosis? Well, let me tell you now, they won't be coming to you. And if they are coming to you, you also need to send them to a health professional. Were you to, as an astrologer, work with a client that you suspected had OCD and you were doing nothing about it, then it wouldn't be a clever thing to not refer them or to suggest that they are referred on to someone so that they can get a proper diagnosis. There are advantages and disadvantages to having a diagnosis. The advantage can be, and I was talking to some members of my family about other members of the family getting other diagnoses to things, is that what happens today in the UK, that if you do get a diagnosis for something, then you're more likely to get help because it has been defined. We have to think about definition of something. If something isn't defined, then we can't help. And it's a very similar thing in astrology, that if we know nothing about the person's chart, we're very limited with how we can help them astrologically. The only way we can help them then is if someone were to come to see you that had no birth data. All you could do, which would be very valuable because ancient astrologers did this, just do a chart for the moment they walk through the door, or the appointment is booked, or the time that you actually connect, because that in and of itself is an orrery chart and will be extremely helpful. With the person's chart, so either you are contemplating that you might need to go and get a diagnosis of OCD for yourself, or possibly you're working with someone related to somebody that has or hasn't got the diagnosis. Which bits of the chart are the most important? And we have to go back to basics. It's the ascendant, the sun, and the moon, and the transits and whether or not it happened in the past or it's happening now, or their worry is about something in the future. Okay. So I'm going to use a completely random, well, it's not a totally random chart, but it's a chart of somebody that has volunteered. I wasn't going to be putting out on social media. Unfortunately, I'm on Instagram now. I don't know how long I'm going to be on there for, but if you want to find me, it's maryenglish.co.uk. I'm sort of chugging along on there, but I didn't, and I contemplated it. Should I put a call out for people that got a diagnosis and then we can unpick their charts? And I thought, no, that's not going to be especially helpful. But what I am going to do is I'm going to use a real chart for a real person who's agreed to use their chart in the podcast, and just discuss how might we help this person if this was an issue for them. Okay. Now, I've used this person's chart before. We were discussing that this particular person had an awakening, and that was in episode 333, and it was about having an awakening as an indigo. So I have a limited amount of permission to share their charts, obviously on the understanding that they're completely unidentifiable. So you won't be able to see the location of birth for either this person. Okay. Now, so we're using an imaginary that someone is exhibiting symptoms, or you're working with someone and there might be a possibility of OCD. What should you do? Blah, blah, blah. Should you do something? Shouldn't you do something? So we've got this person here. It's a sun sign Scorpio, moon sign Cancer, and Mercury in Sagittarius. So ascendant is Virgo. So we need to take into account Virgo ascendant people are going to be more concerned with their health. Sun sign Scorpio people are going to not want to do fluffy stuff. They're going to want to go deep. Moon and Cancer person is going to be very emotional and slight difficulty here. Mercury in Sagittarius, they're going to want to be able, they want you to believe what they've said, so and to not believe them, but to believe in them, because Sagittarius is all about believing in. This person has a very clustered chart. They're most definitely an indigo. They're born in, which I'm not showing on there, but they're born in the 1980s, so they're born early, so there's different generations of indigos. So they first started being born in the 1970s, so they're the wayfarers that started things out. Then you've got the 1980s indigos, so they've more got into themselves, and the 1990s indigos who aren't quite so bothered about being indigos. The first two generations are. I get less emails from people born in the 1990s worrying about things like this, which this person had, which was an awakening. So we've got a very one-sided chart, so we need to keep in mind if someone's got a one-sided chart, they're going to be very good at focusing down on one thing, and they're going to be absolutely rubbish about being able to see the bigger picture. And also, since the ruler to the chart is Mercury, and Mercury's out of sign to their sun sign, Mercury really does need some TLC here. It's the ruler to the chart. So we're making an analysis now on someone's chart, and we're keeping in mind that there could be something OCD going on, but maybe not a diagnosis or anything just yet, and we're keeping that in the back of the consideration. And they're a fixed sign, so they're going to want to feel better now. And this person, when they did email me, they were in the middle of a difficult place. So it was quite a lot of times I'll get random emails from people that it's very early in the morning of the time that they're living in. They haven't slept, they probably not eaten for a while, they probably, the biggest way to cause a mental upsetment is to not eat and not sleep. Just those two things will immediately knock your mental wellness out of sync. There's only so much that your body can put up with before your mind will go, eek, I've had enough. So when we're talking about mental unwellness, we must consider the physical needs that the body has, and the mind, which is obviously the driver to the problem that might be occurring in mental unwellness. The mind cannot survive without the body being fed and without the mind being able to sleep. Even if it doesn't sleep, just lying in bed for 8 hours. Doesn't matter if you don't sleep, just lying down and not doing anything. I think mental detoxification's a very helpful thing when somebody's suffering from a mental unwellness problem. The worst thing that a person can do that is suffering from a mental unwellness is to give their mind more things to worry about, especially. And I've worked a lot with people who stay up late and go to bed with their mobile phones and watch YouTube videos until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because they're trying to find answers to something. Trust me on that. It will do exactly the opposite. Put your phone in the kitchen, go to bed in your bed, put the covers up to your chin and just lie there and do absolutely sweet FA until you get to the morning. That is the only way. I mean, if you need to wear things over your eyes so that you don't see the light coming into the room, or you have to put earplugs in so you can't hear any noise, just lying in bed with no distractions other than your mind is what your mind needs. Your mind needs to settle. It's really important with a mental unwellness problem that the mind is allowed to settle. Now, unfortunately, this person was born with Uranus and Mercury conjunct. So were this person coming to me and they're paying for a consultation, which didn't happen here, so I'm quite happy to talk about it on the podcast, my biggest recommendation would be to focus on, because Mercury is the ruler to the chart, and we're only looking at this from an astrological perspective, we're not looking at it from a medical one, but in a way it's medical, because the thing this person needs is to slow down their Mercury, because Uranus is going blah 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 blah, because that's how Uranus works, and the mind is going okay. So anything that can soothe the mind, and it's in the third house. What's the third house all about? Brothers and sisters and siblings and short journeys. Maybe this person needs to have a little whiz around the block every day. They get in the car and they go around the block and they come back to the house. But that's all they do. They don't stay up late at night watching YouTube videos hoping to find the answer to life, universe and everything. Sun's conjunct Saturn, so they need to be taken seriously. We always have to think when we're working with someone, how do they want to be treated? So that's why I can't do a podcast on, the astrology of OCD. I have covered things like Pluto conjunct Mercury, which can make people have more obsessive thoughts. But that doesn't need to be a negative thing. You could be obsessively have thoughts and be a brilliant poet. Yeah? What we do need to take into account is the thing I love most about astrology is that we can see life from their perspective. Virgo ascendant, I'm going to be particular. Sun in the second, I'm going to worry about my money and how much I'm worth financially. What is my financial worth? Conjunct Saturn, I take myself terribly seriously. Pluto in there as well in the second house. The money thing is so important. Until I feel financially secure, it's all going to go overboard. And then the moon's in the 10th, that's the career. I want to be in the right job. I'm not going to feel good unless I'm in the right job. And I've got a cluster chart and I've got a stellium. So you need to listen to the stellium podcast. You want to go more about, that's Stephanie does the stellium podcast. Steph's lovely. So this person never became a client. This person sent me a random email and then I didn't hear anything more. I don't know if they still do listen to the podcast. Hello, if you're out there. So I've made a chart for the time that they contacted me, because we're using as much as we can to be able to help the person as much as possible. So this is the contact time. So this is when the email went ping into my inbox. And if you think that's not significant, Auntie Mary's going to tell you it is. So if you're an astrologer and you're going to private practice, pay attention to the time that the email goes plump into your inbox, because that in and of itself is also important. The presenter, what's it all about? Relationships. Sun in the 7th, what's that all about? Relationships. I never got to ask this person about close personal relationships. We didn't have a dialogue. It was one email and I replied and I didn't get a reply back, and that was it. It's very disconcerting for me as a person. I think people forget sometimes that astrologers have feelings. Anyway, I got the email. Didn't hear anything back. And if you'll see the moon in the chart, in the query chart, can you help me, Auntie Mary? The moon is in the 10th. The ruler to the chart is Venus. Don't forget relationships are so important. Rules of the chart Libra is Venus. Venus is located in the ninth, long distance travel, further education, philosophy. The Moon and Pluto are near enough in opposition. Moon and Pluto are in opposition, so they weren't feeling very well when they emailed me. But it's all about relationships. Now, if I'd had my head on properly, which I didn't because it was a random email and it was a scary email, I might have asked the question, I can't remember what I replied back, I might have asked the question, what's happening on the relationship side of things at the moment? Because they themselves natally have got Moon in Cancer. They're not going to be worrying too much about yesterday, but they'll be talking about yesterday because their Mercury's in Sagittarius. Keep the tenses in mind when you're doing a chart analysis. Past, present, future. Yeah, past is mutable, present is fixed, future is cardinal. Where is the majority of this person's chart focused? So they themselves, they're mostly mutable. They've got more mutable planets in fire than they have of the others, because they've got 1, 2, 3, 4 planets immutable. So it will be something from the past. It's not their moon, so they're probably not even in recognition of it. Something happened. And going back to what I said at the beginning of this podcast, what happened to you? And that needs to come up in the conversation. What happened to you? And hear and listen to everything that happened to them. Because all mental illness, because you're not born mentally ill, that's a mental disability, that's different. No one is born mentally ill. Something flipping horrible happens to them. They might have dealt with it at the time, and then it pings back and they get reminded about it when they get into their 20s. So they're sexually abused when they're a kiddie, and they get into a close personal relationship with somebody in their 20s, and then they touch them in the wrong place, and where woof, that immediately reminds them. So there's always going to be a point at which the problem occurred. What happened to you? I don't know, no background to this person. It wasn't given to me, just that they'd had an awakening. And I don't think the awakening is significant. I truly don't. I've discussed at the podcast about the awakening itself. But if we're looking at a mental health problem, it isn't the awakening that's the issue. It's what led up to the flipping awakening. What has happened now since the awakening? What are you worrying about? So ruler to this chart, Venus located in the ninth. So the conversation needs to be on spirituality. What are your beliefs? What do you believe is happening? What is important to you? So that's just a quick analysis of what might happen in a consultation, or can happen in a consultation, when working with someone with a mental unwellness. I hate calling it mental illness because it sort of implies that it's not going to get better. They're unwell. They've got mental flu. It's perfectly possible to recover from mental unwellness. Now, obviously, we have to take into account that somebody's got schizophrenia. They're not going to be ill all the time. They might occasionally, there'll be blips of it. But the way that the medical model is set up, there is so little about the body needing to be taken into account and eating healthily. And mental unwellness improves the minute you start working on your body and making that as healthy as possible, because the mind and the body are linked. We're not just a mind and we're not just a body. And when you look after the body and you think, oh, maybe I shouldn't be eating all of those things, whatever it is that you might be eating, maybe I shouldn't be drinking all of those things that are contributing towards it. If you aim for as healthy as body, and forget about your mind, because your mind is just going to be all over the place. If you're helping yourself and you haven't got as far as getting a diagnosis, but you're mentally unwell at the moment, work on your body. Forget about your mind. There's not a lot you can do about it at the moment, but just focus on the body and make that as healthy as possible. And do you know what the side effect is? It will absolutely affect your mental unwellness and improve it. Big percentage marks, okay? So I'm not going to apologise for this episode. I'm not going to apologise for it going on. What I am going to tell you is that there is a webinar coming up, and we've got quite a few people signed up for it. We've still got a few spaces. So if you ping me over an email, mary@maryenglish.co.uk, we're doing transits Thursday this week at 7 p.m. I'd love for you to join me. It will not cost you a penny. It's a discussion. If I haven't got your birth data, then there's an opportunity on the booking app to add your birth data in so that I have your chart, so that I can advise if you were to raise your hand and ask a question. Obviously, a webinar is not the same as a consultation. However, there is a webinar. It is about transits. It's this Thursday, the 15th. Let me check my diary. So it's this Thursday coming, which is the 15th of February, and it's 7 p.m. UK time. Obviously, in the US, it's going to be earlier in the day for you. If you're the other side of the world, it's going to be early in the morning. Early in the morning? Yes, because late at night, it's going to be early in the morning. So I do hope you have a fab week, and I'll be back next week. And if you just so happen to be on Instagram, I have said I don't know how long I'm going to stay on there for. You can find me on there, maryenglish.co.uk, because there's a singer called Mary English, and when I was on Twitter, I got Mary English first before she got Mary English. I can't remember what she called herself on there. And one day somebody copied me in, because I am Mary English, and I pointed out to them, actually, that's not her account. She's called something different. It's the other way around now. She obviously got into Instagram before me, so I'm maryenglish.co.uk. It's so annoying when somebody takes your name, isn't it? So I hope you have a fab week, and I'll be back next week. Bye bye now.